What is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast with Justin and Brandon. We are here to recap the Canadian Grand Prix. It finally happened, the thing we have been waiting for. The two McLaren drivers have come together, but it wasn't even for the win. It was for P4 because we saw a surprise Mercedes resurgence. Max Verstappen somehow put it on the podium. A lot happened in Canada. Brandon, how you feeling?
Doing great. It was an awesome race. A lot of action packed in there across the entire weekend, really. And Canada's such a beautiful track. It was an awesome weekend. We got to watch it live, which is great. It doesn't happen super often when the races are starting at 6 in the morning. But yeah, it was a great race over here in North America.
We started watching it together, and then I drove back to my house, and I get home, and I see Lando Norris has been in the back of Oscar. It was a fairly standard race, little bit of two-stop strategy. I said, it's fine. I'll drive home, watch the rest of it. Next thing I know, it has absolutely kicked off at Canada. So we have got lots to talk about. Let's not waste any more time saying things that no one cares about and jump right into it with your one-sentence rundown.
My one sentence rundown is Mercedes back? Canada always seems to suit Mercedes really well. I don't know if it's the cooler temperatures. This weekend, it actually wasn't, on race day, it wasn't super cool in Canada. It was pretty, I think, standard temperature for a Formula One race, but Mercedes still did really well. Finished 1-3 in pretty dominant fashion. At any point in the race, it didn't really look like they were in danger of losing the lead or P3, to be honest. So it was a great drive from Kimi, great drive from George. So fantastic weekend for Mercedes. And I think this puts them in a good spot to fight for P2 in the Constructors' Championship going forward.
Yeah, P2 in the Constructors' Championship is certainly wide open, and it does seem Canada is a track that suits Mercedes. We've seen them perform well in the cold in the past, and it wasn't necessarily cold this weekend, but when it's like, is it cooler in Canada or in the desert of Bahrain? I mean, yeah, it's obviously a little bit cooler in Canada. Just ambient temperature is a little bit cooler there. So I think we do see the Mercedes thrive in that. I think I was most impressed with Kimi Antonelli this weekend. He got ahead of Oscar Piastri at the start, and you're right. It really wasn't in doubt necessarily. Oscar was putting pressure on Kimi, and Kimi was pretty flawless in his defense. Oscar got close. Kimi didn't fold under the pressure, put his car where he needed it to be for Oscar to not get by, maintained it through the pit stop phases. So Oscar Piastri was there trying to get that podium for a good part of the race, and Kimi Antonelli, wise beyond his years, did a great job to hold on to that podium. I think he certainly deserved it.
Yeah, it is. It blows my mind that he is just significantly younger than I am, and he's doing that on a track in a Formula One car. It's incredible, really really fun to watch. So Kimi has arrived. I'm ready for more.
Yeah, only 18 years old. We've seen him get his first sprint pole already. This is his first podium in Formula One. He certainly does have a bright future ahead, and I cannot wait to see what that holds. My one sentence rundown, we have to talk about it, and it is the McLarens finally come together. They have been so evenly matched in pace so many times this season, but through a Lando Norris qualifying mistake or different strategies or Max Verstappen being in between them, we haven't necessarily seen Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris fighting over the same piece of track yet this season. In Canada, that all changes. Lando Norris drives up to the back of Oscar Piastri while he's trying to get by Kimi Antonelli, and they, so a couple laps of fighting, good defense from Oscar. Lando sends it up the inside at the hairpin. They go side by side almost through the final chicane on the track. Lando has a better run, but really drives into the back of Oscar Piastri. That is at least how I see it. He wasn't necessarily significantly alongside, loses his front wing on Oscar's rear tire. So I do place the blame with Lando Norris, but this could be the first of multiple times this season that we see those two drivers come together, because ultimately they are teammates, but they're fighting for a world championship against one another.
Yeah, and I mean, Lando immediately owned up to it. I mean, you listen to the radio, hear him talk. He says, "My fault, my bad," which I think was a responsible thing to do for Lando. He was kind of going for a gap that, in my opinion, I don't think was really there. Oscar took the racing line, and like you said, Lando kind of just drove right into the back of him. But Lando took the blame, and I definitely think it's not the first or not the last time that we'll see them come together. So I'm interested to see more drama between the two of them.
Yeah, it's certainly unlucky for Lando Norris. Obviously, Lando Norris won't say, "Oh, I drove into the back of him on purpose." Oscar didn't make any stunted movements. That is just the racing line. You kind of drift back towards the left before sweeping out for turn one. That's just the racing line, and that gap really was never going to be there. It's unfortunate for Lando because even with that pretty hefty whack that took Lando out of the race, Oscar carried on just fine, no punctures. I was pretty shocked that he did not suffer a real puncture from an impact that was strong enough to take Lando's entire front wing off. And so Oscar gets those 12 points from P4. Lando Norris scores 0 points. So that's now over 20 points that of a championship lead that Oscar has. And, obviously we just saw Lando DNF and that could switch like that. But still, it was going to be Oscar gains 2 points on Lando, and now because of this one little small mistake, Oscar now has more than doubled his championship lead.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I think it's 22 points now. So we're nearing a race win between the two of them, which is pretty significant, especially when you think points are going to be just hard to come by. You're not going to have a lot of situations with Oscar in P1 and Lando in P8 or vice versa, because they both have been on the pace so much, so well this season. McLaren has a great car. Both of them are great drivers. So it's just unfortunate for Lando that Oscar was able to continue on and extend that lead.
Yeah, but you know what they say, sometimes it's better to be lucky and good. You obviously need some luck to win a Formula One World Championship, and so if that luck falls Oscar Piastri's way, who's to say in round 18 we won't have some luck fall Lando Norris's way and, even it out. And, even though we say points are hard to come by, a P1 to a P2 is still 7 points, and so that's three races that could happen, and Lando's right back and close the gap with doing nothing else than just beating his teammate. So it's not insurmountable. We're only 10 rounds into the season. There's plenty of time for Lando Norris to close that gap back up. But we're already talking about points in the championship, so we might as well do our favorite segment. Everybody loves it. Our weekly championship recap. As we have stated, Oscar Piastri leads Lando Norris by 22 points. But with this DNF and Oscar finishing off the podium, have they let Max Verstappen back into this championship fight? A little cheeky P2 from Max Verstappen this weekend. But even more so, George Russell, he had a very consistent start to the year, was quiet for a couple rounds, but then takes a pole and a victory this weekend in Canada. So, do we need to think George Russell is a little sneaky championship contender again as well?
I mean, I think we're only 10 rounds into the season, right? We've got 14 races left. There's a lot of Formula One left to be on the up for grabs, right? There's also sprint races left. So there's a lot of points that are still available. And I think, if you have these weekends consistently, then yeah, I think Max Verstappen is 43 points off the championship lead, which again is not insurmountable. And George Russell's a little bit further back from him. So if these weekends continue to happen, I think we absolutely could see them back in it.
Yeah, well, this was the first weekend that we saw McLaren not be the true fastest car. They've had some weekends where they've been more dominant and less dominant, and Red Bull's been closer. But this was the first weekend where it felt like even in practice, McLaren was not the clear quickest car. And yes, that happened once out of 10 rounds. But if that becomes something that happens more often, then I'm more willing to say that Max Verstappen and maybe George Russell are back in this championship fight. Right now, I'm not fully ready. I'm definitely not ready to say that George Russell's in this championship fight. I'm gonna need to see, another win or two soon, more consistent podiums from him, maybe even Mercedes being the clear second fastest car from here on out. But Max Verstappen, yeah, I'll say maybe we're getting there, and especially if we continue to have these weekends where McLaren is no longer the clear dominant car, and you keep giving those chances to Max Verstappen, then he's certainly not gonna leave that championship fight without going down swinging.
Absolutely. And, for Max to win a championship this year with how dominant the McLaren cars have been would be just absolutely incredible. And
It
it still happened.
Yeah, it definitely could still happen. That would surely cement him as one of the greats. People have already argued, you hear every time someone wins a world championship that it's because of the car. They only win because they have the best car. Yes, Max has done that in his career, but I mean, like three of his championships, you could say he already hasn't done it with the best car for the full season. But if he did it this year, that would certainly cement him among one of the greats of our sport.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Mercedes. We've already talked about them a little bit. in your mind, are they the clear favorite for second in the Constructors' Championship? Ferrari, who knows what they were doing this weekend? Red Bull, they're still fighting with only one driver. Mercedes look like they have it all together. Kimi Antonelli is only going to get better. This is their first win of the season. It happened before Ferrari managed to get a win. They're in P2 right now. Are they the favorite for P2 in your mind?
I mean, I think they've been the most consistent out of the three that are fighting for P2 of Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes.
Ferrari,
Mercedes,
Max, and Mercedes, but yeah, okay.
it's the same thing. Max is equivalent with Red Bull in this conversation. But yeah, they've been the most consistent out of those three teams. So I think in terms of the Constructors' Championship, consistency is really what kind of wins that championship in my mind. So I think Mercedes, if they continue to do this, and you know, as long as I've been a Formula One fan, they've been a very consistent team. So I think Mercedes is, in my mind, the clear favorite.
Yeah, Mercedes has always been that team that gets the strategy right 9 times out of 10, knows what to do with their drivers, handles all these situations because they've had that experience at the front. So if you keep giving them these opportunities, I agree with you. I do think they're probably the favorite for second in this championship, the way it's just unfolding. Red Bull not having a clear second driver to fight Max, Ferrari just looking slow and doing Ferrari things. Yeah, I have to imagine that Mercedes are the clear favorites for second. But obviously, I mean, Ferrari is still there. You can't count out Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. You know, Lewis hit a groundhog and that gave him some damage, but they messed up for the strategy for Charles again. And so unfortunately, I think Red Bull are probably going to be out of, that fight for second if they can't get someone to score points alongside Max. Like, there's no way Max can do it all on his own with how close the top four are. And so, yeah, I think it's between Mercedes and Ferrari, and right now I've got to give the edge to Mercedes.
Yeah, I agree. It really was unfortunate that Lewis hit that groundhog. I feel like that was the most Canadian thing that could have happened at the Canadian Grand Prix. But we'll have to see if Ferrari can turn things around in the second half of the season.
They did it last year, so it would not be unprecedented for them to do something like that. Our final question for this episode: does the FIA have a problem with bias? George receives no penalty for his aggressive braking that he did under the safety car, falling further behind, or so Red Bull would say. I've seen everywhere online people saying there's no way he gets a penalty. It's because he's British. He's got a British passport. He's not going to get a penalty. Lo and behold, no penalty for George Russell. He probably did it intentionally to get Max Verstappen an extra penalty point if he could, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was something warranting of a penalty. Lando Norris receives a 5-second penalty for his incident with Oscar Piastri, but no penalty points, which that one seems a little bit more insane to me because we've seen penalty points given for much less. We've seen penalty points given out in practice for silly procedure issues. And so that one's a little more confusing to me. Maybe you could see the British bias in that one. Personally, I don't think it's a bias problem. I think it's the FIA is just incompetent and inconsistent with their stewardship. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think it comes down to like we don't have permanent full-time stewards, so we're getting kind of people in and out, and they just can't seem to make consistent decisions, which I think would help the sport quite a bit. So I think that's what it comes down to. I don't think it's necessarily a bias. I tend to agree with you on that. Um, and as far as the whole George Russell situation goes, I mean, yeah, it could have been intentional, but I don't think it was like intentional enough to like warrant anything really. I mean, and six one way, half a dozen the other. We'll never really know what was going through George's mind in that moment. But yeah, it was kind of weird that Lando didn't get any penalty points for that. And, like you said, we've seen a lot of penalty points handed out for a lot lesser infractions. So it was interesting. But yeah, I think consistent stewarding is really what will solve the problem. So hopefully we can get that at some point soon.
Yeah, wouldn't you know it? We say that we need consistent stewarding, no changes are made, and here we are once again having this conversation because we don't have stewarding that is consistent from race to race, and it's just unfortunate because this race was incredible. We saw the McLarens come together, George gets his first win, Kimi's first podium, and here we are talking about stewarding on this podcast because it's inconsistent from race to race. Like, I want to enjoy what actually happens on track, not what happens in a back room in the paddock an hour after the race ends. So just fix it, please. That's my one wish, is that we fix this.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I think that also, and this has also been inconsistent as well, but just coming to quick decisions is also really important. So whatever the decision is, that's fine. Just get to it really quickly. Where, we're talking about, Red Bull lodging a complaint against George Russell, and then like 2 hours after the race, if they had decided that George was, deserving of a 5 second or a 10 second penalty or whatever, it's like, okay, George could have lost his win like 2 hours after the race. It's like, no, we need to make these decisions as they're happening.
Yeah,
Uh,
we're done with the whole podium ceremony. George has already sprayed the champagne. Next thing we know, he's got a 10-second penalty. He's finishing P18. So yeah, I mean, yeah, we should come to decisions. I will say that is at least a little bit better. It felt like in 2021, an incident would happen 25 laps from the end, and they'd say, "Oh, we're gonna investigate after the race." I'm like, "What are we doing? We've got a third of the race left. Figure it out." So they've at least gotten better with that. But yeah, it would have been kind of insane for us to get 2.5 hours after the race. George is already on a jet flying home and oh, he lost his win. We already did the celebration, whatever, doesn't matter.
yeah, yeah. As would be crazy, but crazier things have happened in Formula One, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
And it didn't happen. George gets to keep his win. Everyone is happy. We made some predictions for the Canadian Grand Prix. You went into this weekend leading 25-21 after an incredible Spanish Grand Prix prediction that you weren't even here for the recap podcast of. I had to do it all by myself and just watch your lead extend. It was tragic. And so I needed a great weekend to recap. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen. So I'm still going to be behind after this one. Podium pusher of the weekend, I said Alex Albon. That could not have been any further from the truth. It looked great after FP1, and then it kind of just fell apart from there, and no point for me on that one.
Yeah, it was a unfortunate race for Alex on Sunday. It just seemed like one thing after another, and it ended in retirement for him, unfortunately. For podium push of the weekend, I said Isaac Hadjar, and that's also going to be a no. He had a good qualifying, and performed decently well in practice as well. But then got a three place grid penalty, and then his race, he just really wasn't able to kind of do anything from that standpoint. Looked like he might be able to get some points at some times in the race, but then just didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, we make fun of Ferrari for having bad strategies, but are the real kings of having bad strategies, and they once again kind of mess it up with Isaac Hadjar and points whenever on the table. Back marker of the weekend, I said Liam Lawson, which is an absolute point for me. Started from the pit lane, did not finish. Need I say more? That's like textbook back marker right there.
Yep, absolutely. Unfortunately, not a great weekend for Liam. I said Yuki Tsunoda, which also a point for me. Started at the back of the grid, not a pit lane start, but he did receive a 10-place grid drop before qualifying even happened. Qualified on merit in P11. Obviously, that demoted him to P20, or the back of the grid minus the pit lane. And then he wasn't really able to do anything from there in the race, unfortunately. He was running around in the back with the likes of Lance Stroll and Gabriel Bortoleto and the Alpines. So,
At least he finished ahead of all of those drivers when all is said and done. So he's got that going for him. But if you wore the Red Bull logo this weekend and your name was not Max Verstappen, you did not have fun in Canada, that's for sure. So we capitalized on that a little bit. Poll predictions, I said Lando Norris, which was incorrect.
and I said Oscar Piastri, which was also incorrect.
Let it be known that last weekend I predicted George Russell to get pole because I said it was about that time of the year where George Russell whips one of these things out. Predicted it a week early, but that is okay. I'm not that upset about it. Podium predictions in P3, I said George Russell, which was incorrect.
And I said Max Verstappen, which was also incorrect.
Hey, at least we predicted that they would be on the podium, so I feel like we deserve some credit for that. Unfortunately, not a point, but we do deserve credit. P2, I said Lando Norris, which was incorrect.
I also said Lando Norris, which was incorrect.
And P1, I said Oscar Piastri, which was incorrect.
And guess what? Also said Oscar Piastri, also incorrect.
Yeah.
Unfortunate.
How could we not predict that this would be the first weekend of the season where McLaren would not be the dominant car and somehow Mercedes would be resurgent? How could we not see that in the future when no signs were pointing to that at all?
I don't know. It's tough. I guess we could have looked back to Canada last year. But oh well.
Yeah, silly, silly us. My one push and prediction, I said that at least one Ferrari would not reach Q3. I feel like I deserve half a point because Charles Leclerc qualified P8 because they left him in the pit lane and managed his tires horribly. But unfortunately, both did reach Q3, so no point for me.
And I said we see at least one red flag thrown during a competitive session this weekend, competitive being qualifying or the race. And we did have a red flag in Q1 of qualifying. So that's a point for me.
Yeah, I can't believe that I lost that point because some Williams mechanics didn't tighten screws tight enough, and I'm going to lose a point for that. That's unbelievable. I said when we made our predictions that we guaranteed that we were going to see a bunch of red flags in practice and then nothing would happen. And there were tons of incidents in practice this weekend, and I thought I was golden, and then that happened, which was unfortunate. But we did get to see a nice look at the inside of a Williams car, which I will never complain about. The fans at Alexander_Mark Zui, Max will get another penalty point. Despite George's best efforts, that did not happen. At Lou Good, Albino Signs finished in the top 5. That was incorrect. And at Coconut Banana Bread, Bortoleto, Colapinto, and Stroll finished bottom 3. That is incorrect, but Stroll was the last finisher. So you at least got that right. The other two were incorrect. And it actually was Franco Colapinto's best weekend since he returned. So golf clap for him on that one.
Yeah, good job, Franco. Good job, Franco.
Unfortunately, you extend your lead somehow after this horrible weekend for both of us. You are now leading 27-22. That's a pretty massive gap in this predictions championship. So I've got to come up with something if I'm gonna defend my title anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, you can never count a horrible weekend for me out, though. It's just one bad weekend for me and one good weekend from you away from tying this whole thing up.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna need next time out in Austria, and I'm coming for it. This time I mean it. I'm coming for it. But that is all we've got for this episode, recapping the Canadian Grand Prix. Before we get out of here, Brandon, what are your parting podium thoughts?
Man, it was a good weekend in Canada. It was fun to watch the race together, watch it live. And, it's just such a beautiful track, provides great racing always. So I was happy to watch it. Can't wait for next year.
Yep, can never complain about a good weekend in Canada. And before the race happened, I saw ticket prices were a little low. So who knows? Maybe next weekend we'll find our way up to Montreal, get to see this one in person.
That would be absolutely incredible.
As a man who has experience in Canada, I'll take your word for it. Thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast. As always, before you go, be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, do all the things. We're so thankful that you let us talk to you about Formula One. It means the world. We will see you next time to predict the Austrian Grand Prix. But until then, have a great day and God bless.
See ya.